Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Flow Summit. It's lovely to be here with you. I think this is a very important opportunity for all of us who are participating in this wonderful conference, in this wonderful summit, to really come to a next state of awareness about a very important aspect of life that is being described as the flow. So what we're going to be exploring here, what we have a chance to remember, what you have a chance to learn if you've never heard this before, is really what is the flow? What is the flow about? And how does it work? And how do we become part of the flow? How do we get into the flow? And what can we get out of it once we are in the flow? That is, what is the purpose of being in the flow? I've heard since I was a younger person, be in the flow, and get in the flow. But, unless there's a purpose behind it, unless there's an intention, unless there's a declaration of why I'm doing that, then being in the flow is not going to do us as much good as it might. So this is all we're going to be learning about and talking about here today as I share with you what I have come to understand about being in the flow. And let me share with you, if I could right now at the outset, how I came to my understanding. Some of you may already know of the books that I've written and the experience that I had. But for those of you who may not be clear about that, let me please explain to you that about 25 years ago, I had a most extraordinary experience in my life. And it was an experience that I would now call getting into the flow. But it happened to me spontaneously, and yet it happened out of a deep desire on my part. I wouldn't have called it at that time a desire to be in the flow, because I really didn't know, to be honest with you, what I was doing. That is, it wasn't something that I did intentionally, but almost accidentally, except that it did arise out of, and this is the first thing we need to know, a deep desire on my part to change my life, to move in a different direction, to have a different experience, to understand more about who I was and why I'm here, and how the whole process of life works. That was present at the beginning. I may not have had a specific intention to get into the flow, but I did have a specific desire to learn more about life, to understand who I am and how this whole process that we call life works. So what happened was I woke up really in the middle of the night at 4:23 in the morning in great frustration. I couldn't sleep anymore because I didn't understand why my life wasn't working. And so I actually threw the covers back, left my bed, went out into the living room, plunked myself down on the couch, and I began just thinking about, what is it that I don't understand? There must be something missing, some data missing, something I don't understand about life and how it works, the understanding of which would change everything. And then I happened to see a tablet on the coffee table in front of me, a yellow legal pad. Maybe I had it out for some other reason a couple of days earlier, but there it was on the coffee table, and I picked it up and I began writing a very angry letter to God. Dear God, what does it take to make life work? The question, of course, that many of us, millions of us, probably all people at one point or another, in one form or another, have asked the universe and themselves, what does it take to make life work? And to use the words that I wrote, what do you want from me? Calling out to God. What do you want from me? And what do I have to do? Somebody give me the rules. I'll play. Just give me the rules. And that's when I began receiving the messages that many people now have found in the Conversations with God books, a series of books that I wrote under that title, Conversations with God. I never intended for my experience to be published. I was having a very private moment. I would consider it a process of individual journaling. So it never occurred to me that anyone else would ever read any of this information. But I was told in the middle of this first evening, this first process, I was told in the middle of it, you will make of this one day a book. and many people will read it, and this is part of your work. So I sent my handwritten notes to a publisher, actually, on a dare. I was actually daring God. Really? You really think that someone's going to publish my handwritten notes that I claim to be a conversation with God, conversation with what I've discovered to be that source of wisdom and clarity that resides within all of us? You really think a publisher is going to publish it? We'll see about that. So I went ahead and sent it to a publisher who actually did take my notes and turn them into a book without adding anything, no editing, just as I had written it. Question, answer, questions of God, answers that I received in my mind from that divine source that resides within all of us. And that became the first Conversations with God books, a book. And there are other books that followed that as well in the Conversations with God series. So that's my background. That's how I come to have an understanding of what it means to be in the flow. I found myself in the flow almost accidentally, as I've just described at the outset. But then I learned how to be in the flow intentionally, with absolute declaration that this is what I was going to do. I was going to remain in the flow and use that process of being in the flow to guide and to direct the course of the rest of my life. That's exactly what happened. So that's what I'd like to share with you here today. Let's start with a question. What does it mean to be in the flow? I mean, really, what does that mean? We hear that a lot. Be in the flow or go with the flow. What does that mean? What are we talking about when we talk about this thing called the flow? And how can we go with the flow? Is there a way to do that? I have found that there is. At least for me, there are some obvious steps that one can take to be in the flow. I have discovered 4 steps, in fact. Acknowledge, define, understand, and experience. Excuse me. So step 1 for me in going with the flow is, first we must acknowledge that there is such a thing as the flow, that that the flow exists, that it's not something we're making up, it's not something imaginary, it's not something that someone once told us about, but that may or may not be real. It actually exists. There is an event, I want to call it, a phenomena in the universe called the flow. So the first step is that we acknowledge that the flow exists. The second step is that we must recognize that this flow that exists can be defined. That is, it's not some amorphous, generalized, experience out there, some, pie in the sky, airy-fairy, idea, but that you can actually define what the flow is and come to a deep awareness of its various aspects. The third step, after we define what the flow is that we must understand our definition, in which we have to understand how that definition applies to our own lives and how that definition plays itself out in the movement of the flow through life. And then step number 4, we choose to experience the flow. By the way, this is an option. Experiencing the flow is an option. It's not a given. It's not something that happens automatically. Going with the flow is an option. Just because the flow exists doesn't mean that we are in the flow. The flow can flow right past us, and we're not in the flow. It just flows right past us like a river going by, and we forgot to jump in. And so the river goes by, and the flow can flow past us. Or the flow can flow through us. So the decision that we are invited by life to make is, do we want the flow of life to flow past us, or do we want it to flow through us? This is a question of free choice. You know, we're all given free choice in life. This is something that I was told when I caught the flow in my first conversation with God, that God let me know the source of wisdom and clarity that resides within all of us. Let me know that we are all at free choice. Nothing is a given and nothing is a requirement, but we must choose, and we are invited by life to choose the experience that we wish to have. So that's very important for me I'm emphasizing that, and I'm going to emphasize it continually throughout this brief sharing with you, so that you really understand what going with the flow is about. It's about making a decision. It's about making a choice. It's not about just watching the flow go by. It's about making a choice to step into the river, if you please, and go with the flow and swim along with the flow and become part of the flow so that the flow moves through us. So now let me offer you my own steps, the 4 steps that I have taken, so that we can understand at least the process that I have used, and maybe you can gain from that and benefit from it. And it might be of some use to you as well, yes? So step number 1 is about acknowledging that there is a flow. Now, we all know that everything in life is made up of energy. That's not a piece of new information for any of us here, I'm sure. So we all know that all of life is made up of energy. And I'm going to call this phenomenon, this aspect of life that everything is made up of energy, I'm going to call it the prime energy, or maybe I could call it the force of the source. You know, there really was something to all of that we saw in the movie, where they kept on saying, "May the force be with you." There is really a force in the universe, and it's the force of the source. That is, it's the source of the universe from which the force emerges, and that emerging force that I call the prime energy, some might call the essential essence. This is what I call first cause. To use a metaphor, it's the spark that ignites the flame of life. So the source of this energetic flow is what I call God. I call it divinity. There are 1,000 names for God, but I'm using the word God or divinity to somehow describe or give a name to that source of the force that is the primal energy of life. Now, that energy exists, that much we know. It's out there, and you can feel it, in 1,000 different ways at 1,000 different moments. Now, what people may not know about that primal energy is that this energy distributes itself or disperses itself from the original source in several different directions, or in several different ways. That is, the prime energy manifests in variations. I can think of at least three variations. These are important details, I think, to understand, because once we understand how this all works, we can then step into the flow with awareness and consciousness and knowledge, and not just willy-nilly trying to figure it all out. What are we doing here, and how does it work? So I'm bringing you these details because this is how I found myself getting into the flow. So the 3 ways that I can think of that the flow manifests in life is, first of all, as the essential essence, what I just mentioned, the pure, unadulterated, untouched essence of life itself. Then as a reflected essence, that what I've learned in life is that energy impacts energy. It is an essence of life that impacts upon itself. And the example I was given in Conversations with God is, imagine pouring boiling hot water into ice cold frigid water. If you pour the warm water into the cold water, you get a third element that is also water. It's still water. It hasn't changed its essential characteristic, but it's exchanged the way it manifests. It's now neither boiling hot nor is it ice cold, but it's something in between the two, so that these two aspects of reality join together to form a third aspect, and that's how creation in the physical realm is produced. That's how creation occurs, by taking these two aspects of the energy and bringing them into a third demonstration or a third manifestation. This is called manifest essence. So there are three levels of the essence that I call the prime source of life: the essential essence, the reflected essence, that is these two, and the manifest essence, that is the third aspect. I'm telling you this so that you can understand that it's this third aspect that we're concerned with. When you're in the flow, what you've done is you've taken the two primary aspects and the reflected aspect of life and brought it together in a concerted process that allows us to produce the outcomes that we would choose to experience in our life. When the third expression, this middle expression, matches the first expression, which I called God or divinity, then we are in the flow. Now, it's not about duplicating, but it's about replicating, which is not quite the same thing. I don't think we're ever going to actually be able to duplicate God, because God is, can I coin a word? Unduplicatable. It's so huge, it's so enormous. Divinity is beyond duplication. But we can replicate, that is, we can reproduce portions of the energy that we call divinity, and have that energy move in us, as us, and through us in our life. Now, here's my understanding of how the flow works. Once we decide that this is what we're going to do, once we understand, oh, I see what I'm trying to do, I'm bringing the two aspects into a third aspect. My own understanding is that the flow moves in the way that we direct it, or at least it can move in the way that we direct it, and that we direct it by how we project it. Did you hear what I just said? I said we direct the flow by how we project the flow. That is, it's not about trying to manipulate what comes to us. This is a really important key. It's not about trying to manipulate what comes to us. It's about choosing to create what flows from us into life. In other words, the flow is not so much about observing as it is about what we are producing. Now, regarding how we are experiencing that flow, this depends on what we are choosing to produce. So you have to make a choice. You have to be very specific about what you're choosing to produce. And I'm going to give you a little tip here now. Many beginning students on the path of spiritual evolution feel that manifestation, producing outcomes in your life when you're going with the flow, is about producing specific events or results in your life. I'll use a simple example: a brand new car, or the perfect partner, or a lovely new home, or the best job, or the income you've always wished you could have. These kinds of physical world events or outcomes. And many people, frankly, to be honest with you, in my opinion, far too many people think that this is what life is about, and think that this is what it's about, to go with the flow, to be in the flow. You're in the flow when you find your perfect partner, or when you wind up having your perfect job, or when you create your perfect income, and when you experience your perfect life. But is that really what being in the flow is about? Is that really how it evidences itself, that you're in the flow when all these things are arising and apparent and present in your life? You know, it would be interesting for us to notice that many people who have all of these things, interestingly enough, are still not happy. I could tell you stories, and I'm sure you could tell me as well, stories of people who have all those things. You know, abundant income, wonderful life partner, the perfect job, a beautiful home, a nice car in the driveway, you know, wonderful health. They have all these aspects of life, that make life wonderful and exciting for them. And yet, even in their case, even in the case of their own life, they find that they're not happy. In fact, they're terribly unhappy because they realize that something is missing. Oh, they finally come to conclude that's not what life was all about to begin with. It wasn't about, get the guy, get the girl, get the car, get the job, get the house, get the spouse, get the kids, get the grandkids, get the better job, get the better car, get the better house, get the better spouse, get the better spouse, get the better spouse. It wasn't about all of that. It turns out that when you gather all these things, you realize, there was something else that I came here to do to begin with that has nothing to do with any of this. That's what it means to be in the flow. To be in awareness, in a place of consciousness, in a place of deep understanding of why we came here to the physical realm to begin with. What are we doing here? Who are we? What is our true nature? And when we are in the flow, truly in the flow, we are replicating and representing and demonstrating the first essential essence. We are demonstrating divinity, and we are doing it in a way that has nothing to do with all those things I mentioned, the car on the driveway and the house on the hill and the job, with your and the office, you have your office in the corner now with your name on the door and all those apparent reflections of success. Is this what success really means to us? Or is success a whole different experience and a whole different demonstration? And I believe that it is. That's what I learned in my conversations with God. And that's what I want to share with you at the next level of depth as we move deeper into what it really means to be in the flow. Let me say here that our awareness that there's something larger going on here than meets the eye, something more than just, get all the stuff. And by the way, I don't mean to insult you in a sense by telling you something you probably already know. I've got to acknowledge that if you're watching this program, I'm going to say that 99.9% of you already know. We're aware of that. It's not about gathering all this stuff, getting, the nice car, the nice house, the nice income and all the rest. Those are wonderful accoutrements. Those are wonderful furnishings for one's life, but that's not really what life was meant to be all about. I know that you know all of that, but this is about reminding you and reminding myself as well, by the way. One of the tools that I want to share with you here today, and I'll be sharing more toward the end of my discussion, I want to share with you some practical tools on how to apply this information that I'm bringing to you today. And one of the practical tools is to be aware that we already know most of this. We're already aware of it. It's about not learning something new. It's not about discovering something we didn't know before. It's really about applying, really about putting into practice what we already know. It's our awareness of the truths that I've been sharing with you that produces our experience. This is what generates our individual reality as well as our collective experience on the earth, whether that experience is a global pandemic or a worldwide economic downturn or the earth's climate crisis or something more individual and something more personal to you, the outcome in your life that you are seeking to express and experience in a particular way. And by the way, I should make it clear that these manifestations don't always need to turn out to be somehow negative. I mentioned a few, the pandemic and the economic problems and so forth, but they're not all negative outcomes. There are positive outcomes, and more often than not, the outcomes are positive rather than negative when we are in the flow individually. And if we can find a way to get the entire of humanity, or the largest percentage of humanity, in the flow collectively, then we will see more and more positive outcomes for the collective that's known as humanity. It could be something wonderful for us to behold and wonderful for us to create, that we have an opportunity to create not just our individual lives, but our collective lives in a way that demonstrates what divinity is truly all about. Then we will not just be watching the flow, we will be producing the flow, because that is what the prime energy is. It is what we actually are invited to use to produce what it is we wish to experience, individually and collectively. So going with the flow is accomplished in those 3 steps that I mentioned, and offers positive results when we take those steps deliberately, intentionally, purposefully, and powerfully. This is in the word, in the words that I found. This is basically what I wrote about in a book that I produced called The God Solution. I'm calling it The God Solution because that's really what we're talking about here. It is the solution that we have been invited to embrace and given, actually, to experience in this collective life on earth. I believe that the God solution, what I'm calling the God solution, is the way to solve the problems that each of us face individually and that our species is confronting collectively. That's really what we're talking about here. The God solution is about defining the essential essence even more specifically. It's about not just saying that the essential essence is divinity expressed, but it's divinity expressed in its essential way, in the way it really is. See, here's what I've discovered. As I looked at life and looked at all the belief systems that are out there in life, I learned that most people have a difficult time actually defining divinity. Hard to define divinity. You think I'm kidding? Go up to 100 people. You go to a shopping center, go to a shopping mall, go to a place where there are lots of people with a clipboard, and tell them you're taking a survey. How would you define God? And watch the number of different answers that you get. And so I think that the challenge, and what I say in The God Solution, which is the book that I've just finished writing, the challenge for humanity is finding a single way, one way, to define God. Then we have defined what the flow is. We're not just simply saying there is the flow and that the flow is divine energy. We are saying what that divine energy is. And that simple act, that magnificent choice to actually define in specific terms what God is what causes us to begin directing the flow rather than just watching the flow move through us and move right past us. We begin directing the flow in a certain way, and the flow that comes from us to life produces outcomes that affect not only our life, but the lives of many other people, which is, in fact, one of the extraordinary benefits that occur when we're in the flow. So let's take a look at that. What is the definition of the flow itself? That is, what is the definition of God? How do we define the flow that we want to get into? See, it's all very well and good for us to say, go with the flow, but what are we talking about here? What is that flow? Give me the definition. in specific terms. Here's what I was told in my conversations with God. Divinity is defined in two words in English. The two English words, which is my native language, so forgive me if I'm not speaking your particular native language, but in English, divinity is defined in two words: perfect love. Perfect love is the definition of God. That's what God is. God is an energy, an energetic projection that one can feel. You can actually feel the energy, and you can identify it as soon as you feel it. We would call it, in simple terms, pure love. Now, it may not seem revolutionary, like, oh, what an extraordinary revelation that God is love. But I'm not simply saying that God is love. There's more to it. Everyone has been saying for centuries, God is love. But this is a different statement. We're not simply saying that God is love, we're saying God is pure love. That is a particular kind of love. There's only one demonstration of love that is pure. The demonstration of love that is pure is a love that asks for, hopes for, needs, requires, and demands nothing in return. Nothing. You know that you have loved purely when you need, ask for, hope for, require, and demand nothing in return. Are you capable of demonstrating pure love? Of course. We all have done it. If you've ever held a baby in your arms, either your own baby or even the baby of someone else, but you have the privilege of holding that baby in your arms for a bit, maybe a grandchild or someone else's child, and you rock that baby in your arms, and you feel pure love. You love the baby, and you require, demand, need nothing in return. To use maybe even another kind of example, have ever you had a pet, maybe a dog or a kitten or even a horse or any kind of an animal that you've turned into a pet, and that you actually go out and touch that animal and maybe even give it a big hug, and you need nothing in return. You don't require anything in return, and it's not necessary for you to get something back from that animal in return. You simply love the animal because it is. You simply love the baby because it is. And in many moments of your life, you simply love life like a sunrise. I remember once I was in Hawaii and I was experiencing a sunrise. I had gotten up at very, very early in the morning, 3:30 or 3:45 in the morning. And then I happened to be outside on the patio of this home that I was renting in Hawaii, and the sun came over the mountain ridge. And I was, in that moment, in love with life, in love with the sun, in love with the sky, in love with life itself. We've all had those moments. Maybe you've had that kind of moment when you looked at the night sky, not the morning sunrise, but maybe late at night, and you see the canopy of stars overhead. Have you ever had that experience? Of course, I'm sure all of us, at least once in our life, have found ourselves lying on our back, maybe on a beach, maybe on the back porch in the backyard, but somewhere just looking up and lying there for a moment with nothing else to do but just contemplate the canopy of stars and planets overhead. And who among us has not fallen deeply in love with life itself in a moment like that? And who among us has not said to ourselves, "Oh my God, how magnificent thou art." And you need nothing back. You require nothing back. You simply love it, all of life, because it is. Now, if we decide to define the flow as the movement of pure love in you, through you, as you, projecting out from you to everyone whose life you touch, in every circumstance and in every situation. Yes, even in situations about which the average person would not be terribly happy. Yes, even in situations that we would not normally think of as celebrating. But we simply send out pure love into that circumstance and into that situation. What could heal a negative encounter with life faster than pure love? The answer is nothing. Nothing could heal it faster. Nothing could cause us to experience it more profoundly joyful than pure love. So I'm going to suggest to you that the secret of being in the flow is understanding the flow that you are creating. It's the flow of divinity moving through you as you out into the world, and that flow can be called in human terms pure love. Now I'm going to give you some tools that will help you to do that. Now let me say, as I share these tools with you, that I'm very clear that we already know all about these. I mean, I've been talking about them in my own work for years. So if you're even a little bit familiar with what I've been sharing with the world in my books and in my talks and in my programs for the past 25 years, you've heard about some of these tools. And even if you haven't heard them from me, I'm sure you've heard them from other messengers as well. So this may not be brand new to you. You're not going to sit there and go, I never thought of that. But it's good, in my experience, it feels good to be reminded. All of us can use these tools, but sometimes we have to remind ourselves, oh, you know what? I have that tool over there. I forgot about that. Yes, that's a really good tool. I simply forgot about using that tool. So I want to share these tools in that context so that you understand. I don't have an idea that this is going to be brand new information for you, but a wonderful chance, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, to be reminded of what we all already know. And the first tool, I think it's the most powerful tool in going with the flow. The first tool in experiencing pure love is the tool that I call gratitude. Let's think about that just for a second. Gratitude to me is an energy. It's an energetic. It's a form of energy that we send out into the universe. It's a particular vibratory frequency. It's a vibe that vibrates in a particular way. And we call that in human language gratitude. If we feel genuine gratitude for all that is occurring in our life, even the so-called negative experiences as well as the very positive ones, that energetic produces an impact like hot water on ice cold water, and it melts the frigid ice and turns it into a third element of reality. So gratitude has the power to even turn around a so-called negative exterior event, circumstance, or experience. And the way it works for me is that I simply use it as a prayer. Thank you, God. Thank you, God, for bringing me this circumstance, this experience, and this event. Thank you, God, for bringing me this opportunity to use exactly what is occurring right now in my life as an opportunity for me to announce and declare, to express and fulfill, to become and to experience, actually to demonstrate who I really am, and to show that I go with the flow. See, you go with the flow when you show that you know what the flow is doing and where it's going, because you are, as I said earlier, you are actually projecting it. You are producing the flow and not simply watching it go by and then maybe jumping in at the end to see where it's going. See, going with the flow is not about seeing where it's going. It's about determining where it's going. And gratitude is a powerful, powerful tool with which we can project energy into energy itself in such a way that we produce where the flow is going. You know, when you're confronted with a big problem, maybe some of you have heard this from presentations I've made in the past, but one of my favorite prayers is this one. Try this out in your life. Thank you, God, for helping me to understand that this problem has already been solved for me. Did you catch that? Please indulge me and let me repeat it just once because it's powerful. Thank you, God, for helping me to understand that this problem has already been solved for me. That wonderful prayer, that wonderful expression of gratitude, sincerely meant. It can't be used as a device to try to fool the universe. You can't fool the universe. The universe knows when you're actually feeling something and when you're just hoping that it could be true. This is not about hoping. This is about knowing. There's a difference between knowing and hoping. So this is about knowing that this problem has already been solved for you. And it is simply waiting for you to step into the solution. So that's just one example of many ways that we can use gratitude and train ourselves to cause the energetic of gratitude, which is something that we are freely choosing. I want to emphasize, it's not something that falls over us. You know, it's something that we call forth. There's a difference between calling for and calling forth. When you call for something, you're calling for something to come to you. But when you call forth something, you're calling it forth from within you. You call it forth from within you, gratitude, and you call that energy, call it forth and send it into the universe as a sincere, authentic response to what is now occurring. How can you possibly be grateful for something that doesn't feel like a good thing that's happening to you? How can you possibly be grateful for those kinds of outcomes in your life? By understanding why those events have arisen to begin with. And by understanding the agenda of the soul. It's not about, as I mentioned before, get the guy, get the girl, get the car, get the job, get the house, get the better car, get the better job, get the better house, blah, 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 blah. But in fact, that we are here for spiritual reasons, that we are spiritual entities having come into the physical realm in order that we might know ourselves and express ourselves and demonstrate ourselves and experience our true nature, who we really are. What a glorious opportunity that life brings us to experience ourselves as divinity and to define divinity as pure love. And gratitude is one of those most tools that I talked about. I think it's the most powerful tool I could share with you. There's another tool also I want to share with you, which helps us get to gratitude. It's the tool that I call stopping meditation. Here's how stopping meditation works. Maybe 3 or 4 times a day, you stop. Let's say you do it 6 times a day. Stop for 10 seconds 6 times a day. That's 1 minute a day, cumulatively, 1 minute a day taken all together. But it's you stop for 10 seconds 6 times a day and just do nothing. Just stop. Stop thinking, stop talking, stop acting. Just stop whatever you're doing. You can do it for 10 seconds, 6 times a day. It's sometimes in the middle of a sentence, sometimes in the middle of a thought. You can just stop yourself in the middle of whatever you're doing and stop. Just stop. Stop the flow of all of that other energy so that you can reconnect with the flow of your own energy and decide again what it is you'd like to put into this moment of your life. Try that tool. Train yourself 6 times a day to just stop. Just stop everything, including what you're thinking. Just stop everything for 10 seconds. For 10 seconds. And allow yourself to become centered once again in the essential essence, the pure energy of pure love. A third tool I'd like to share with you is a process that I call recontextualization. You've heard me talk about this before as well, if you've heard my previous presentations. But if this is your first time hearing from me about these things, you might find this interesting. Conversations with God talk to me about a contextual field. That is a field of experience. It's a contextual field that contains up and down, left and right, now and then, before and after, what we call good and evil, fast and slow, big and small, here and there. All of the contrasting elements and aspects of life itself. And in that contextual field, we place our particular experience. The experience we're having right here, right now, is a good example. And we recontextualize the experience itself. That is, we examine the experience within the context that we understand our life to be about. That our life is about serving the agenda of the soul, or in a single word, evolution. That our life is about the evolution of our spiritual essence, providing us an opportunity to become grander and grander, larger and larger, more magnificent and more magnificent demonstrations of who we really are, which is pure love. So recontextualization works this way. We ask ourselves, in the moment that anything is occurring, let's just use a small example. Let's say you get up in the morning and you meet your life partner in the kitchen of your house, and things aren't going quite as well as you like. It happens even between people who love each other deeply. Sometimes it just doesn't quite mesh, first thing in the morning, and you're having a little bit of a conflict. Not a major battle, but a little bit of a conflict. Now, you stop and you ask yourself what I call life's magic question. Here is life's magic question. Wait a minute. You do this inside your head, by the way, not out loud. In your head, you ask yourself, wait a minute. What does this have to do with the agenda of my soul? And by asking that question, you have recontextualized the experience itself, the event itself, and placed it into a new context in the contextual field, allowing yourself to experience it in an entirely different way, and then to respond to it in an entirely different way as well. With what? You guessed it, gratitude. Yes, gratitude even for this moment of unpleasantness with another person. Thank you, God, for this opportunity for me to now announce and declare, express and fulfill who I really am. And the way to do that will be made known to you in that very minute, because it will become clear to you as part of what you choose to call forth pure love, because you have found a way to be in the flow. This is what it means to be in the flow. Not to be at conflict, but to be in the flow and to be integrated into exactly what's happening by understanding why it's happening and what you can do to cause it to produce what it is you wish to experience, like pouring hot water onto a block of ice and melting all of that which would oppose you if you thought of life in a different way. And let me give you a third, or I should say a fourth tool that I think you will find very, very powerful. That goes along with the first three. This is the tool of what I call being versus doing. And here's how that works. We train the mind to think in terms of not what we're doing or what we could do to make the situation better or to turn it into our favor or to bring us more benefit. It's not so much what we're doing, but in fact, primarily what we're being. And when what we are doing arises from what we have chosen to be, then our actions reflect the fact that we are in the flow. So, Conversations with God told me all about being in the flow by choosing what we wish to be. Do we choose to be pure love? Do we choose to be compassion, understanding, awareness, clarity? What aspect of divinity do we choose to be in this particular moment in response to this particular circumstance? I want to share with you very briefly, if I can, please, an experience that I had 3 years ago. I had open heart surgery. And I like to tell this story because it's so powerful. I can remember being in the operating suite, in the prep room, what they call the preparation room, where they're just getting ready to roll you into the surgical suite. And I was lying there thinking, wow, I'm going to have open heart surgery. I mean, we're not talking about getting my tonsils out. We're not talking about getting a haircut. I'm going to have an open heart surgery here in about a minute and a half. And I had to decide, not observe, but decide how I want to feel about that. And I decided to be grateful. Not just that I was having the surgery, but to be grateful for the whole experience of needing the surgery, seeing it as a perfect opportunity for me to step into pure love of life, pure love of self, pure love of God. And I can remember lying on that table, before they roll you in, I'm on the table and I'm thinking, God, however this turns out, if I survive the surgery and I wind up feeling better than I ever have felt before, which is, by the way, what happened. I feel better than I've ever felt for a long time. Or if I wind up not surviving the surgery and coming home to you and coming home to God. Either way, I win. I love you, God, and I love my life. I love my eternal life that goes on forever and ever and ever because of who I am, a spiritual entity, not simply a physical life form like a dolphin or a whale or a bird in the sky or a fish in the sea. I'm more than a physical life form. I am that, but I'm more than that. I'm a spiritual entity that lives forever and ever, and even forevermore. And when I realized that and experienced that, as I did on that operating room table, then I experienced pure love. Love for life itself. Love for what I call God. Love for myself as well. Love for the moment. That's what it means to go with the flow, to be in love with this moment, just as it's presenting itself right here, right now. And that is what I'll leave you with, my recommendation, that whatever is occurring in your life, however you define it by earthly terms and with earthly words, allow yourself to go into a spiritual awareness, a place of redefining what the flow is. The flow is the energy of perfect love moving through you for all that is occurring with you. So, my closing piece of advice, whatever is happening in your life, go with the flow.